Ha! Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the Long Game Podcast. I just wanted to do a quick jump scare
You
to
got my
start it all off.
engagement anyway. I wasn't expecting that.
Yeah, absolutely. Snap to attention when you're listening to this podcast, because we're going to be talking about various films, including horror films and other spooky goings on in the world, politically and otherwise. This week, we're going to be talking about. Oh, yeah, I should introduce the people who are speaking right now. It's Ben Scallon with Gript.ie and
My
you
lesser
know,
known co-host Jason Osborne.
well, we're going to be talking about the Riad Bouchaker trial and the fact that
Now
that
that
has
we
now
can.
been, now finally, that's something that can be discussed publicly because the trial is over and he's been convicted on 8 counts. Every single thing he was charged with, he was convicted of. We're going to be talking about the fact that the Minister for Housing doesn't think managing demand for housing is part of his job and what that says about the mindset of Irish political leaders. We're going to be talking about the movie Citizen Vigilante and what we think of it and the controversy surrounding it, and our take may or may not surprise you. And we're going to be talking about the movie Obsession and what it says about gender relations and the fears that the genders have for one another. So, what topic do we want to start off with, Jason?
I guess the Riad Bouchaker trial is the most relevant, and as I say, we were kind of prevented from discussing it earlier, even though it's very important, very important trial, important case. But yeah, it was only sort of concluded in a sense last week when, just to give the basics, he was found guilty on all 8 counts by a jury sitting at the Central Criminal Court. And I will just say, initially, obviously, give a shout out to our colleague Fatima Gunning, who tirelessly reported on this over the past couple of weeks. And I really would say offers the best account of the whole trial that you're going to find in the Irish media. If you have a look at her profile on Gript, it's all documented there.
And I might add, at great personal cost in the sense that it was extremely harrowing to listen to. I was talking to Fatima about it the other day, and I mean, you can only imagine sitting there hearing all of the gory details of
Yeah,
a number of children being brutally stabbed, kids under the age of 10 who were just going to school.
yeah,
And I mean, I think one of the most disturbing parts of this story is that anytime something like this happens, it's clearly an appalling tragedy. That goes without saying. But if it was in a very contrived situation, like let's say a family was on holidays in a country that was known for having a lot of violence and something terrible happened, you'd go, okay, that's awful, but at least I'm not going to go to that country, or at least that's somewhat avoidable. You know, if it was something like that, it's a little bit detached from you as the reader or the
yeah.
observer. But literally nobody in this situation did anything wrong or abnormal except the perpetrator. Like, you send your kids to school, totally normal school. It could have happened to anyone. You know, it was such
Yeah.
a an ordinary day that turned into a complete other nightmare. And I think that's part of what makes it so horrendous that something like that can happen in broad daylight. You
Yeah.
can do everything right as a parent and still end up with an outcome like this.
And at the risk of derailing us further, I will just say that I think that principle in general is why migrant crime is so incendiary and why it sort of captures the public imagination beyond sort of run of the mill crime, to put it that way, even though isn't, all crime is abhorrent. But sort of crimes either committed by natives or cases that have long existed in Ireland. Again, even cases that are absolutely horrific on the face of it, because it seems that I think it was Ed West, that British commentator, had made the case before about how across Western countries you will find um, different kinds of crime still to this day declining, and there are nuances to that. I mean, certainly there are nuances to it. But one thing that can't really be disputed is that the nature of crime is also changing. and that random crime is becoming more prevalent. So, unfortunately, it is the case that in Western societies traditionally, certainly in Ireland, the victims of violent crime, as far as I understand, they're typically conducted by people who they're relational, so they're born out of a bad relationship. So people who knew each other, people who were antagonistic to each other. Whereas, as with like say the Riad,
Sorry to interrupt, but just to reinforce your point, like one case that was brought up in comparison to some of the recent horror attacks that we've seen, like this or the near beheading in Belfast and stuff like that, is somebody said, "Oh, well, sure, a couple of years ago, there that teenager Keane Mulready Woods got dismembered and chopped up." In and so how do you explain that was done in this country? So we've seen crimes like this previously. That is a horrifying case. It's despicable. It's evil. It should be roundly condemned by everybody. Obviously, nobody is pro
and it
dismemberment.
was, everyone was horrified by it.
Everybody was appropriately horrified by that, but also there was a gangland backstory to that. That doesn't justify anything. Obviously, nobody's trying to justify something that despicable, but there was context to it where it was sadly not surprising that somebody who was getting involved in extremely dangerous criminal underworld stuff, that things like this do happen in those sorts of contexts. It shouldn't, but they do. That's a
Yeah,
very
I mean,
different
that's the
thing
sense
to you're
behind
just
you.
walking up the street pushing a buggy and something happens to you out of nowhere. That's a different thing, obviously, qualitatively.
It's a sense of, again, these things can be horrendous, but you live by the sword, you die by the sword. If you get involved in bad things, you can't be surprised when bad things happen to you, even if they are shocking and horrifying. But the nature of that whole world is shocking and horrifying. Whereas the last thing that should be shocking and horrifying is coming and going from school. That is, uh, there's no way the conversation isn't going to be expansive just because it's so symbolic of a lot of what's wrong with Ireland, with the Western world more broadly at the moment, which is that our countries are filled with people who take what we've built for granted, who take the fact that kids can safely go to and from school for granted, who take, being able to get public transport around the city for granted, who take all manner of things for granted. And we're coming to a place now, not just Ireland, but again, like the UK, France, Germany, all over the place. These things actually require effort to maintain. These things require right thinking to maintain. These things require justice and law and order to maintain. And they haven't been maintained. They're being undermined such that all of the details of the Riad Bouchaker case are nuts as far as I'm concerned. Which is that, you this guy, Algerian, who somehow became an Irish citizen. Like, what was required? What was required
This
of him to
is
become
this is a question that I'm going to be asking politicians now that we can, and they don't have the excuse of saying, "Oh, well, it's an ongoing case, and I can't comment on individual cases," and blah blah blah. Is what did he do to merit Irish citizenship? He has no known employment history of any kind since coming to this country. In Algeria, he was a butcher. That was over 20 years ago. So he's been in the country for 2 decades. It's not been revealed anywhere that he had any kind of job since he got here. So, in order to be an Irish citizen, you have to be of good character. I mean, what they'll say is, well, he had no criminal convictions prior to this. This one particular incident, he went mental and did this thing, but before that, he hadn't come to the attention of authorities, so we had no reason to assume he's a threat. Yeah, I'm not talking about that. Forget that he's a threat. Forget that he stabs kids, and we'll try to put that massive behemoth of a fact to the side. What was he contributing to society? Like, what was this guy adding even prior to the atrocity that he perpetrated? Can anybody identify what kind of net positive he was? The stabbing occurred over a social welfare dispute. So we know what he took from us. He took the health and well-being of multiple children and an adult care worker. He took the sense of safety of all the other kids who were present in that school. He took the mental peace of the parents. He took money from social welfare and from the Irish taxpayer. What did he give that made him worthy of Irish citizenship? Can anybody answer that question, please? I don't think they
I
can.
mean, even aside from if you've been living a sort of quiet life, whatever, but every detail that's emerged outlines this guy as being, excuse my language, a bastard of the highest order. I mean, when he was looking initially, he went to a different school where he judged in a very calculated manner that those students were sort of too tall, too big to attack, and the risk that he would incur would be too high. So he's a coward. He's a coward, first of all. He was walking around muttering, as he was during the trial, I understand, anti-Irish slurs that I'm not going to bother repeating here. And it's like, this guy was an Irish citizen. And he's like, these things, they butt up against each other. It's like he somehow acquired this status while maintaining hostility and a sense of separation from the people that he had been grafted onto by the government, ultimately, the only way to put it. Every detail that has emerged about the man outlines someone who should have been put on a plane back to where he came from. And indeed, a society with more of a stomach would say that there should be a harsher sentence for what he's done, because I mean the details of the catastrophic injuries wrought to the girl, one of the girls in particular, but to everyone, that he swung at, are absolutely, they're heartbreaking. And the girl is alive, but her life has been transformed forever. She's never going to live independently.
Her life has been shortened. Like, she will not live a long
Yeah.
life as a result of the injuries she sustained. She was stabbed in the heart. Cannot walk. Like, just took her first supported steps last year, and the event happened years ago. She was a completely normal, healthy girl prior to all of this. She had no issue at all. There was oxygen cut off to her brain for 40 minutes. I mean, the adult care worker, Leanne Flynn, of course, we focus on the kids, as we should, because they're the most vulnerable victims in all of this. But the heroic Leanne Flynn, who stepped in to try and save the children, the knife was plunged into her back, her lung collapsed, and she had to have her spleen removed because of the extensive injury that she received. And I mean, look, God bless that woman and her heroism.
Yeah.
There's a lot of men who wouldn't have the courage in that situation to put themselves between an attacker's knife and children to save them. But absolute hero of the highest order. But this is the kind of appalling injuries that the people have received at this person's hand, and there's going to be no follow-up on this. Like, I have not heard. Have you heard any statements from politicians saying we need to make sure that this can never happen again?
No, they're too busy with the EU presidency. They're too busy, projecting themselves on the world stage, whereas you've got things like this rumbling on domestically in the background that clearly, too small for their attention.
Yeah, that they don't want to talk about it because they're the ones who facilitated this and allowed this indirectly. They're the reason why this guy had citizenship, which means he can't be deported. It's just an absolute and utter disgrace. And I personally am going to be having a field day with this as soon as I can get my hands on the people who are in decision-making positions, because they will have to answer many questions about the circumstances under which this happened. We've had to hold our tongue now for over 3 years since it first transpired. That is no longer the case.
I'll make this point again. It's two-tier justice has become a popular concept, certainly in the UK, but it's equally applicable here, because the government came down like a shot on all of the people involved in the rioting. And I do deplore the rioting that evolved in its way, because it didn't do anything to further establish the cause of justice. It deflected the conversation from the essentials of the case for ever since that time, really. You hardly ever talk about the Parnell stabbing anymore until the trial came up. It was always about the, horrific far right scenes we saw in Dublin, even though there was nothing to classify that night of rioting as far right. And I mean, you've even got the basic tried point that rioting is just, like this is not good in and of itself. But the government and the law and order arm of the state came down like a shot on everyone involved in that, as they did after the City West riots earlier this year, to use another. Was it earlier this year or late last year? To use another example. Whereas this was just allowed to sort of drop out of public consciousness, drift along at a very leisurely pace. And I know if Fatima were here, she would make the case about there being sort of administrative obstacles, I suppose, to having moved along any faster, because there was all sorts of questions about his fitness to stand trial and whatnot. Bouchaker's, that is, his fit.
Which by the way, like they were saying, oh, he'd had mental problems and he had to have surgery beforehand, and then after he'd give the Brazilian guy hit him upside the head with the motorcycle helmet, he received further brain injuries and all this. And I go, yeah, I assume that a guy who runs around stabbing kids has mental problems. I don't think anybody questions that, or I don't think that's a normal thing to do. If that's going to be our criteria for letting people off the hook, then no one can ever be charged with any heinous crime.
It's amazing.
No one normal does this stuff. By definition, you're an abnormal freak if you're running around terrorizing kids. I think that's obvious, is it not?
No, I made this point about how there's a clear double standard in the sort of, because if the state, I would say anyway, if the state had wanted to speed this up, it could. It could have expedited resources. It could have bumped this one up, as they do, as I say, with protesters and rioters involved in anything perceived as being anti-immigrant. And they could have expedited this, but they didn't. And so I made this point essentially in a tweet, it was a couple of months back now. And I had people in the comments essentially saying, no, we should want due process to take its course. If they need to take their time in order to pull all of the facts of the case together, and in order to get everything in place for a proper trial, we should be happy to stand by that. And I would imagine these are coming from people who otherwise stand by the slogan, justice delayed is justice denied. It seems like, people are always happy to sort of chant that off when it's with some sort of trendy cause they want to see, turnaround like that on. But when it comes to this, when it comes to an immigrant committing crime that has lots of inconvenient aspects to it, it's like, no, the state is, doing its best. There are a lot of intricacies involved in this. And it's like, no, there's no reason this couldn't have moved faster. The state has shown that it's plenty capable of moving quickly on things that it prioritizes highly enough. Again, the prime example in opposition to this being how quickly they moved on rioters. And everything about it is different. It's like, with these people, they'll publish their names, their pictures of them coming out of court. They'll publish their ages, their professions, their addresses. And I'd agree, if you're criminally rioting, you should face justice. But it's just the ways in which these two things are handled paints a very stark contrast. And for all intents and purposes, there was a complete laxity, and indeed the lack of political reaction, everything, of wanting to sort of throw the rug over Riad Bouchaker, essentially, because he's a very, very inconvenient case as far as government immigration policy goes.
I mean, just there last week, it was in a totally different context. We weren't talking about Bouchaker, but I was having a conversation with the housing minister, James Brown, and he made the laughable and preposterous assertion that all immigrants contribute to society in their own way, which is exactly as delusional as saying no immigrants contribute to society, which I think would also be a stupid statement. But if some far right nut job got up and said every single immigrant's a criminal, they're all scum. Not one of them is any good. They're all absolute bastards. If anybody was to say that, every reasonable person would go, would you come on? Of course that's not true. We all know immigrants who are nice people who do, good work in this or that context and who are good neighbors and who go to mass on a Sunday and help out at the local community center. We all know that. Would you stop painting people with a broad brush? And that would be the correct response to somebody who had that take. But yet we have a senior cabinet minister who has the equally ludicrous position of saying no immigrants are wasters who do not contribute to society. There's not one of them, even though literally days later we had the conviction of one who was a prime example of a uncontributing. I mean that's I can't even think of a word that doesn't involve expletives.
Well, I mean,
to
I suppose
describe
if he
what
was
he
making
is.
I suppose if he was making the claim that all immigrants contribute to society, he's not wrong. It's just you didn't clarify what exactly it is. Some of them are contributing,
Yeah, I guess
which is
some
like
of them
contributing to the
contribute to the assault rate and the attempted murder rate. That is true.
yeah,
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 but
exactly.
like, can we just agree as everyone normal on all sides of the political spectrum? Can we just agree to ostracize and sideline the lunatics who take both of those extreme positions, where it's obviously false to say, oh no, there's no immigrants who just sponge off the social welfare system and who don't contribute anything and who don't work or who commit crimes. No, that never happens. Like, you're clearly a delusional Aegis, like, and obviously not observing the facts in front of you, and you are as wrong as people who say that all immigrants are bad. Like, I don't know why that has to be spelled out to anybody, particularly not a senior cabinet minister in charge of one of the most important portfolios in the entire government. But there you go.
Yeah, so maybe we'll move on to that next topic, but just give some of the final details for those who, because we all see headlines these days, but sometimes we don't look into them to get the essentials. So just in relation to Riad Bouchaker, he was charged ultimately. He was found guilty on all 8 counts by the jury, and he was charged with the attempted murder of 3 small children, assault causing serious harm to their carer, assault causing serious harm in respect of 2 other young children and a young Frenchman, and production of a 36-centimeter kitchen knife.
Which,
So
how
the
much
case
is
was
that? Like, that big, something like that.
Oh yeah, it's some mad length.
And so you think of a child, I obviously can't demonstrate here on the screen, but like, think about the height of a 6 or 7-year-old kid, and then think about that blade in comparison to their body. Like, is
Yeah,
it? Can
it
you
could
even
go through a
imagine the kind of
child.
damage? Yeah,
Yeah, it
that'd be
would
like
go
you or
through.
me getting stabbed with a sword, like a katana or something.
Yeah. So the case was adjourned for sentencing to the 12th, again, adjourned to the 12th of October. Like, again, Fatima would have more expertise in this, but it just seems like a long time away for the sentence to finally be passed. But anyway, that's where that's been left at. And this I made this point before, but and I'm speaking kind of broadly here, but I'll make it again because I think it's worthwhile, which is that the left loves hard cases until it doesn't. They're always carving out hard cases for anything related to gender. It's like, oh, what about the little boy who thinks he's a girl? That's why we have to, go as fast as we can to enable people to cut off body parts and mutilate themselves. When it comes to abortion, like Neil Richmond did it all a couple of weeks ago when he announced that the government was doubling its funding to Planned Parenthood. It was absolutely egregious. And his contribution, well, that was when he announced that in the course of addressing the Dáil before the 3-day waiting period vote. And he spoke about, he was calling for some political decorum. And he was saying something to the effect that somewhere around the country is a 14 or 15-year-old girl who has been raped and now has a very difficult decision to make. And it's like, aside from the fact that he just conjured up a completely hypothetical scenario, this is done all the time in relation to abortion. When it comes to immigration, they could not care less about hard cases. They don't want to hear about them. It's always about the general trend, which is again, which can also be disputed, which is that immigration is economically good for Ireland. But that's all they're interested in. They don't care about hard cases. And the Riad Bouchaker thing is about as hard a case as you're going to get. Um, there's nothing in the man's favor. There's all there. He has done one of the worst things that's possible for a person to do. And as you say, there are questions need to be answered about this. It can't just be the case that because it was so delayed in coming to trial, it slips out of memory, and then it's just another one of those things that I think would be a compounding injustice on top of everything else.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely atrocious, and this is not the end of this saga. We will be continuing to press for answers, and we will hopefully be able to report back to you next week with further information. But just an appalling story all around, and I would encourage all viewers to pray for those involved, pray for the
Yeah.
most importantly, of course, the victims, the little children. They're saying that her prognosis is not good. The most severely injured girl, but of course, medical projections and assessments have been wrong in the past, and so please God, let this be a situation where they are wrong and where she actually does make some kind of full miraculous recovery. Yeah, if you believe in that sort of thing, I would encourage you to pray. And uh, we can just hope that this is the last time we see something so disgusting, although I fear it will not be. With that said, do we want to move on to more from James Brown, the housing minister, and some of the other
Yeah, I
remarks he
think
made?
so. Because you had an interesting engagement with them, so why don't you tell us about that?
So I was talking to him last week about the housing situation more broadly, and I kind of asked him effectively, when does he expect his housing policies to actually start working? Which I think is kind of
Yeah.
fair, because he's been at it now. I mean, him personally, he's been at it for a year and a half or so now. And if you want to include his party and I mean, of course, the last housing minister was a Fianna Fáil guy as well. So
Yeah.
him and his ilk have been at this for about 13, 14 years with not much progress. So I asked him, what's the story? And he said, oh, well, look, we are making progress in this area and that area. And of course, we're making a bit of headway, but it needs to be more and more needs to be done and blah, 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 the usual stuff. And then he said, because, the housing demand is extremely high now, and it's all about supply. My job is to try and meet the supply as the population grows and so on. So I pointed out that, of course, the reason the population is growing is primarily due to migration, which he didn't really respond to. And I said, you say that the main focus needs to be on supply, but is part of this not also managing demand? Is that not something that you're looking into? And he effectively said, look, that's not really my area. Like, I'm just there to meet whatever demand is there. That's kind of my job and my focus. And so I don't really have a role in that. I think that was his exact phrase that he used, which is really just a jaw-dropping thing for a senior government official to say, is it not? Like, you open any economics textbook, take any economics course. What's one of the first things they're going to teach you on page 1 is supply and demand. The two things go together inextricably. It's like the basics of the basics of the basics that everybody learns, and the fact that they intersect with one another in a very obvious and direct way. The fact that we have one of the most important ministers in the country who apparently does not see it as part of his job to manage demand explains everything, does it not? Is that not like
Yeah.
this is, lo and behold, the perfect encapsulation of why we are where we are?
Yeah, I mean it's as though sort of cross-departmental collaboration doesn't exist in when they give a response like this. The idea that you know, immigration, that's for the Department of Justice. All I have to be concerned about is building houses. And it's like, not at all. It's like a housing crisis is one where there's far more demand than there is supply for housing. And so I would say if you're interested in solving a housing crisis, you should very much be interested in the demand side of things.
Yeah, like
especially if
don't you guys have weekly meetings? I think it's called the cabinet meeting, if I'm not mistaken, where you sit around a table with the people who are responsible for these areas. Can you not hop on the phone and say, "Here, Jim, we got to get to grips with this"? Like, how is this not your problem? Of course, it's your problem. Like, you all have a joint responsibility to run an efficient operation here. Like,
it's it when I saw the clip, what interested me was that it's the latest installment in a long running series that comes up from time to time of senior government figures or ministers pretending that they've either never held office or that they didn't have significant influence and power while they were in office. Because, like, of course, as a senior government minister, he has the capacity to even influence conversations in other departments and to sort of recommend collaboration, as I say, between different departments. If you were a very forward thinking housing minister, he would definitely be in conversation with the Department of Justice about maybe lowering the number of people coming into the country because that would really help the housing situation. Um, but that it's like, as I say, it's a broader trend. And one of the ones that I was most struck by, at risk of derailing this topic, was our old friend Leo Varadkar, uh, naturally praising an absolutely horrendous bill in the UK. He was praising, this was last week, I think it was, praising the UK for publishing a draft bill to ban LGBT conversion practices. And he was talking about this as, being brilliant.
which
It's
I
not,
haven't looked into it, but I presume the reason it's horrendous is because gently trying to tell your kids that they might not be trans is now a criminal offense or something to that effect.
yeah, it's unbelievable. A lot of the things that are already that it says it's going to criminalize are already criminal, like coercive control, abuse, harassment. All those things are already illegal in UK law. What this really does is it casts a really broad net over anything surrounding this topic, such that it is conceivable, based on how this draft bill is written, that a parent or a teacher or a priest or a pastor or whoever it might be could potentially face up to 5 years in prison or unlimited fines if they tried to talk I don't know, 15-year-old out of the belief that they were the opposite gender or whatever it is, or that they've been born in the wrong body. So it's an absolute rag of a piece of legislation. So naturally, Leo Varadkar came out and was praising it. But what caught my eye more so was in a subsequent tweet saying, this is Leo Varadkar, the former Taoiseach, saying this. Not just former Taoiseach, former Minister for Enterprise, former Minister for Social Protection, former Minister for Health. You name it, he's been in that office almost. And he says, almost 6 years since it was promised, we have yet to see a draft from the Irish government or even a target date. Why? And he tags Norma Foley and the Government of Ireland Twitter accounts. And it's like, to refer back to this installment of people like acting as though they've never been in government buildings. Like, why are you asking that question? You could have, and I'm delighted that he didn't. Let me be clear. Why didn't you prioritize that? Why didn't you have a conversation with your colleagues and make sure they prioritize that?
Yeah, and like, why are you tagging Norma Foley? Just shoot her a text.
Yeah,
Like, you know all these people. Like, what do you mean?
like it's just pure it's purely performative. And I always say Leo has not, I don't know him, so he probably resent if ever he tunes into this, he resent me calling him Leo. But he has not done himself any favors since resigning. I mean, he just sort of sits there shooting off his opinions. The comments are full of abuse because people are feeling the effects of those opinions in policy, and he's acting as though he's some sort of random commentator. Clear as obviously these days very much like some random progressive commentator, uh, like he's paid by some NGO asking why the government has not advanced these things. I found it so funny. He said what was it? He said since it was introduced 6 years ago. I mean, the man, yeah, almost 6 years since it was promised. It's like he was, what was it, Taoiseach from 2020. He was Taoiseach in 2020, revolved, he was Taoiseach 2017 to 2020, revolved out of it when they were doing the revolving chair thing. became Taoiseach again in, I think, 2022 until he resigned in 2024. It's like, was that, you know, you were at the height of government for the whole time this stuff was in the air. Roger O'Gorman was in I suppose the seat that would have been responsible as Minister for Equality for some of that time. Did you not feel comfortable enough talking about that with him, making
Yeah.
him prioritize that? I find that very hard to believe. And as I say, I'm very happy that they didn't have that conversation because this legislation is a piece of ass. But it's just hilarious to me that like he's tagging the government as though he, you know, it's been out of his hands for years now. It's like, oh, you know, where do you even start with this sort of learned powerlessness?
Yeah, they really I think that the lack of understanding of their own jobs, and of course we've seen this with O'Donovan, we've seen this with so many of them, where they seem befuddled when you ask them to, I don't know. Anyway, I think there's a fundamental lack of understanding on the part of politicians of what their role even is supposed to be, or what is expected of them, like what they actually uh are supposed to be doing. They'll stray into areas that are absolutely not their responsibility, where they shouldn't have any role at all, and they won't deal with things that are actually within their domain and their
I
wheelhouse.
I
But
I think this is fully on display now during this EU presidency. I mean, on the topic of housing and Ireland famously being in an absolutely in a pit in relation to this issue, it was hilarious. Ursula von der Leyen from Cork the other day tasking Ireland with sort of steering the EU's response to a Europe-wide housing crisis. As like, you know, I mean, of course, this is the way the EU works. Ireland is steering the EU presidency now. This is something within their remit, but like the whole thing is a charade. It's like, who in their right mind would let anyone, any Irish politician, any Irish civil servant, anywhere near trying to resolve a European housing crisis? Like, if you have a system that results in situations like that, the system's broken, which I
yeah,
think is what a lot of people would argue.
yeah, most definitely. And speaking of systems that are broken,
Oh yeah.
we I suppose we might move to a film which is doing the rounds and which has focused on a broken system, namely the broken European justice system. This film is, of course, Citizen Vigilante, which is essentially the synopsis, if you were to go and Google it, is in a nutshell, a former soldier has become sick of the fact that so much crime, particularly migrant crime, is allowed to go unchecked by the authorities. We've seen things like Rotherham in the UK, where grooming gangs were allowed to act with impunity for years and abuse thousands of girls. We've seen all kinds of different cases where people get off with atrocious crimes in different European countries because the cultural factors or whatever kind of hippy dippy excuse you want to use. And we've seen many atrocious crimes, like the one that we referred to at the very start of this, with children being attacked and women being sexually abused and so on, all sorts of horrendous crimes. And so the premise of the film is this guy, in a John Wick like fashion, decides he's going to take the law into his own hands and become a vigilante and start dealing with it. And he's going to take on corrupt officials and judges and things like that. And so this has been massively controversial. It's actually banned in Germany. They're talking about banning it in the UK. And when I first heard about this, I thought that's ridiculous. I mean, first of all, it sounds like it's highlighting a very real issue. All of those issues that I just explained and discussed are very credible and serious topics that need to be discussed more. We talk about them on this podcast all the time. And this is just the gosh darn liberal media trying to censor things that they don't like. For once, a movie has been made that has a different ideological slant and they don't like it. Having seen it, I haven't actually watched the full film, but I watched many scenes from it to kind of get a flavor of it. I've actually changed my mind. I don't like this film at all. and and one of the this is not the most important thing, but I will have to lead with this, that first of all, it just isn't a good film. Like, on a technical level, it does suck ass.
Well,
The acting,
I will say the director is not famed for being very good. Uwe Ball. He's if you look through his filmography, it's just a collection of crap essentially.
yeah, that doesn't surprise me at all, because the acting is not good. The dialogue is super forced. Like, we all know the storytelling principles of like show don't tell and so on, and um they're like bashing you over the head with political commentary. So there's a lot of stuff where, I don't know, there'll be some Muslim guy and he's like, but the reason I had to do it is because my culture tells me that I am allowed to, and this is outlined in Quran chapter so and so, and blah blah. It's like really unnatural things that like no
Yeah.
one would ever say. Like, it's just badly written. So from that perspective, I don't care if the premise is good. It just sucks. Like, I can't, it's not a well-made film. So that's the first problem with it. Special effects are crappy. There's a scene where a car explodes and it looks like it was done in Windows Movie Maker. So so yeah, not great from that perspective. But on a more substantive and important note, I'm a Christian. I'm skeptical of migration. We've spent most of this podcast talking about our gripes with the modern migration problem. It's a huge
Well, this
issue.
I'll just nip this one in the bud. If someone doesn't like get where you're coming from on this, like, there's no point even addressing them because
Yeah, like, you've just listened to 40 minutes of me explaining my views on immigration, so you know where I stand on that. With that said, I feel like it's vengeance and wrath porn for people who are basically unhinged. And one of the reasons I say that is to give one scene which I think illustrates it nicely. The
and
main
this is obviously
character,
full of spoilers for those who are interested in
yeah,
it.
if you haven't seen it yet and you were planning on it, then spoilers ahead. But like, there's one scene where these teenage migrant boys rape a girl and then they get let off by the justice system. Appalling injustice within the confines of this story. Terrible.
And many,
So
we will say as well, many, what gives this its sort of emotional heat, that there are many situations like this across Europe that do take place, where
yeah,
migrant perpetrators face very lenient sentences, if at all, for, politically dubious reasons.
yeah, heavily based on a true story, and many true stories, in fact. So the main character, he goes to the house of one of the main young fellas who did this and who was let off with the crime, and he holds the entire family at gunpoint, and he has a conversation with them. And essentially, over the course of the conversation, the parents and the sister, he's got like a teenage sister who's about his own age, they refuse to sufficiently condemn his actions. They're kind of making excuses for it. They're saying, well, look, this is normal where we come from and blah, blah, blah. And they're trying to like explain it away or something. He kills the whole family, including the daughter and the mom. And like, okay, they have terrible values, maybe, like this specific family that we're talking about, like, they believe appalling things. Is that a death sentence now? Like, you kill a family for that? Like, it just seems absolutely unhinged. And then you go down to the comments and there's all these people being like, this is the way to deal with this problem. One guy said, I watched this scene 150 times. And I got,
Oh my word.
you're not mentally well. And like, these comments have hundreds of likes. Like, you are a lunatic. Like, if you wanted to say people who think like that all need to be deported, absolutely agree with you. Not culturally compatible. No
Haven't
problem with that
integrated.
whatsoever.
Yeah.
Yeah, clearly there's a huge issue there. No issue with that whatsoever. But we're just going to start gunning down people who think things that we find to be backwards. Like, what is wrong with you? Or there's another scene where he's driving along in a car and he's having a conversation with somebody and he's trying to prove the point that um he wants to prove that people will rather die than break the rules. So he veers into oncoming traffic. They're on a random rural road, and there's the other driver who's coming towards him for a head-on collision. They could either switch into his lane, which would technically be illegal, or they could go into a ditch. So they go into the ditch and their car flips and then it explodes. Now, first of all, that's not how cars work. Your car's not going to explode from that. And it looked absurd. And it was like a B movie tier. But putting that aside,
It's just that's such a stupid plot. Like I haven't seen that scene. It's such a
like you
stupid plot
so you
inclusion.
killed a random innocent person because they wouldn't violate traffic laws. Like what is wrong? Like because you followed the law, that's why you died. So he's like the Joker. He's not like a righteous character at all.
Yeah.
Because when I went into it, I was thinking he's going to be killing like adult male grooming gangs or something like
Mhm.
that. And I mean, I don't support vigilante violence in general because there's no quality control. So if something like that was to happen in real life, even then I would say like this is not the role of random citizens to be taking things about into their own hands. But I would at least understand it because we all have a natural pining for justice, and it's a
Yeah.
very natural human instinct to see an evil person who got away with the crime get their comeuppance and to say good. That there's nothing unnatural or unhealthy about that feeling or that instinct. But that's not what it was. Like it was again like shooting an unarmed family because you don't like their ideas. And especially given that like we know in some of these cultures, does the wife really have her own opinions or the daughter? Like is she are they even allowed to disagree with the husband if he says something? You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
so anyway, everything about it I just thought was it was like really not good. And you'd have to worry about like copycat
Mhm.
attacks because like it's how many times have we seen left-wing media which encourages violence which we rightly condemn because this sort of thing does have an impact on unstable people who aren't thinking clearly. You do get lunatics who won't be able to distinguish fact from fiction and film from reality. And so if a left wing movie came out, and there have been left wing movies that encourage violence or tacitly glorify violence, I think that that's disgraceful and corrosive to our public discourse. I can't be a hypocrite and say anything else about this, so far as I'm concerned.
No, I agree entirely with your perspective on this one. There's a lot to say about it. I mean, it is that this movie was put out there. I would say very perceptively. As I said, because directing skills are lacking. Although I haven't made a film before, so they're probably better than mine. But I think by any objective standard, his directing skills are lacking. But he clearly was very perceptive in identifying that this is the sort of movie that would tap into a sort of sympathetic vein because the movie is dedicated to at the end. I can't remember, and it's been a while since I saw the credits. It was dedicated either to specifically the grooming gangs or to all of the European victims of this kind of crime. So it's entirely a political commentary. The movie, but there's a number of reasons why like you've essentially outlined all the reasons why I think it's objectionable, but it just strikes me as sort of catering to the basest instincts in the viewers, which is that I again don't even need to explain. Europe has a massive it has multiple massive problems. It has an immigration problem. It has a migrant crime problem connected to that. I think more broadly, it just has a law and order problem. I think, and how it interacts with those first two things. But I think more broadly, it just has a law and order problem. Um, and you see that through things like moves to decriminalize drugs and whatnot, which I would not be a fan of at all. But anyway, you can't, in my opinion, allow emotions to take the reins purely on this. I do think that the proper response to our present times in many ways is a righteous anger, but anger can be very blinding. I think, as you said, there's no quality control of vigilante justice. I don't know how many times I've seen absolute sloth and trash do the rounds on social media, X in particular, where people get all of the details of some situation involving a non-ethnically European person wrong, or all of the details of some sort of alleged migrant crime wrong, even though they also get them right sometimes, many times they get them wrong. And you think, if this were to translate into real world action and violence, that would have been an absolute catastrophe against justice itself.
I
And
mean, I
I
mean,
think,
sorry to interrupt, but like this has always been the case with this sort of thing, and like I'm clearly an extremely patriotic Irish person. I love our rebel heroes. I love Robert Emmet and all these guys. But I remember hearing a story where during Robert Emmet's attempted rebellion, there were all these organizational problems and there was a breakdown in discipline and stuff, and so he ended up calling off the rebellion early on. He said, listen, this isn't working, we're gonna have to regroup and figure out something else. But after he called it off, some of the lads had been drinking and they were still amped up. They had kind of gotten ready for battle mentally, and so they wanted to do something. So they went into the town and they grabbed some rich looking aristocrat, just the first person they saw, where they said, that bastard looks important, grab him, dragged him out of his horse and carriage and piked him to death. It turned out he was one of the only aristocrats at that time who was actually really sympathetic to their cause and was largely on their side, and they killed him out of stupidity. So, and obviously Robert Emmet didn't support that. He wasn't around for any of that, but this happened in his absence. But my point is, this is what happens when people who don't have any kind of investigative skills don't, like, the reason we have the processes we do is to prevent things like that. The reason you have investigators and lawyers and evidence and courts is specifically so you don't just eyeball it and end up hurting random people who have nothing to do with anything. But sorry,
I
go
would
on.
say, well, like obviously people, the retort to that would be, yeah, but these things aren't serving their function, as is evidenced by, all of the actual things that are happening. But yeah, where we come from, as I would say, actual conservatives, you acknowledge the goodness of all of these institutions and the roles they have to play in society, and acknowledge. I think, yeah, again, this appeals to the sort of basest instincts in people. Where if someone were to ask me, what's the sort of best contribution a young person could make to changing the culture, obviously aside from being a devout Catholic, which would be my first answer to that question, it would be to, like, obviously become very educated and learn so you're not going to be tricked by propaganda and rotten thinking, but play the game, much as the left did over previous decades. Play the game, go get a law degree, start stacking institutions full of people who think properly, and change the culture from the inside. I mean, that is what a significant progressive element did over previous decades, and that's what's got us to, politically speaking, the situation that we're in now. I think that what this does is say that no, the best thing you can do is take to the streets and start getting violent against migrants, essentially. And first of all, that would be unjust, just to take to that. It would also be entirely not productive to fixing Europe's present woes, which are real and deep, because it starts providing actual evidence that the narrative can point to about the far right and the dangers of the far right and all of this business. Whereas it'd be a lot more productive to, yeah, as I say, become very educated, become very learned, really know what you believe and why you believe it, study, get into positions of influence, and go about doing that. If you were asking me how you should effectively go about fixing Europe, that is what I would say to you. And I know, like, I think I see the grassroots of this process at work already. Like, I know great people across Europe who are, again, Catholics, people who have a proper understanding of justice, have a proper understanding of the purpose of the law, who have gotten into law, who are getting into positions in all sorts of institutions across Europe. And I think that what you need in terms of cultural renewal is a supercharging of that process.
And
And this, I'll just say, this movie does nothing to contribute to that. All it does is, oh yeah, crime against immigrants and people who don't look like us. Yeah, it's great.
And like one of the responses as well is going to be from people who, whether they know it, are essentially pagan or totally atheistic, where they'll have a kind of a, well, that's what many of these people want to do to us. Like, they believe in force-based ideologies like Sharia law and things, and they're coming from cultures where they want to annihilate us and our belief system. So why are we being the only idiots who are following the rules? This kind of line of argumentation. And the answer is because I don't get my value system from Sharia law or from any of these other beliefs. Like, is that not obvious? The reason I think those belief systems are wrong is because they're beneath us as human beings. They're beneath the people who practice it, included. I don't take my morality from people who believe in barbaric things. Why would you? Like, I don't understand what. And they'll say, as a pragmatic argument, they'll go, yeah, well, good luck with that.
Yeah,
If
you're gonna be
ever,
you're gonna be wiped out then.
yeah, people have been saying that for thousands of years. Who would have thought that the Christians who believe in turn the other cheek and the Sermon on the Mount would have beaten the Vikings who believe in sinking an axe into your forehead and taking your stuff? That's exactly what happened. The Roman Empire, all different kinds of
The
empires throughout
Ottomans, the
history.
invading Islamic armies in the south.
So, yeah, like the idea that the idea that there are certain individuals coming to our society who have backwards and incompatible belief systems, so therefore we should become as backwards as them, is a ludicrous argument, so far as I'm concerned, which I totally and utterly reject.
Yeah, I mean, I of course, there has to be a provision, and the church doesn't exclude this at all, a provision for self-defense, but generally speaking, random vigilante justice, certainly not of the variety that's portrayed in this movie, it does not fit that criteria. I am a fan of, and this is where, people get very annoyed at the Catholic Church because I think it's very liberal on a whole bunch of things. It's like, no, you can't mix up what the church teaches with what this or that particular churchman holds, including and up to the Pope. Like, I would say one thing that I disagreed with, for example, Pope Francis on, was he said that there's never any place for the death penalty. I don't think that's true. The church holds that there is a place for the death penalty. It says that it ought to be executed by the state. The state is the one who has the authority to execute that, and that's long been understood. I think that the state has the authority to execute violence in order to protect the vulnerable, the innocent, society more broadly. And I think that or one of our biggest problems at the moment is that sufficiently clear sight has fled, and now you've got this sort of place. You've got this place where, oh no, we can't, like, the state can't be too heavy-handed with this or that particular category of person because that wouldn't be humane or right. It's like, Christianity never held that. Uh,
Yeah.
that's a dereliction of justice, I would say. So it's just that it's like proper, kind of blurring things here, but proper conservatism, to my mind, if you're going to expand it beyond the sort of church, is actually believing that the institutions that you have are good and that they're worth preserving, and that the traditions of those institutions are good and worth preserving. It's not getting run away with your passions and deciding you're going to, steer into the oncoming lane of traffic to make a point and just, kill some randomer because they wouldn't steer into your lane of traffic instead.
Yeah, it's every kind of the I think the whole point is that it's easier to destroy things than it is to build them, and to just like take a sledgehammer to everything. And the whole point of being a conservative is that you are not a radical. You don't want to tear everything down. Yeah, I'd like there's just so many things that I find distasteful, and I know we spent a long time on this topic, and we don't want to move on to obsession briefly, but um like there was a video a couple of years back, or maybe a year ago or something, where there was a migrant boat illegally trying to land in Spain,
Oh, I
which I
remember the
don't
one.
support. And then you had like speedboats ramming
Trying
it, or
trying
like,
to swamp it and ramp it, yeah.
yeah, like
Ram it.
like going over the top of it like this. And everybody's like reposting it, being like, "This is base. We need more of this," and all this kind of thing. And I was thinking, you don't know who's on board that thing. There could be babies. There could be human trafficking victims. There could be, somebody who's disabled, who can't swim, who has like no functioning legs or whatever. Like, God only knows who's on board. Like there could be some woman who is there against her will because she's being sex trafficked or whatever. Like, God only knows
I mean,
what you're dealing with.
even
And
if
if
there,
and me saying that, there's gonna be, I guarantee you, there's gonna be comments on this video being like, "Oh, you guys sound like liberals."
yeah,
That
drank the
like,
Kool-Aid.
yeah, like it's not liberal to not want to kill kids. You know what I
No, I
mean?
would say
Like, can we
even
have
if
a basic level of humanity here? Just not
even
like,
if it's not women and children on land, they are all, these military age males. Still say you shouldn't want to swamp the boat and have them all drown in the Mediterranean.
I want to deport them all.
Well,
I want
exactly.
them
Like
all
when
to
they
go
do get ashore,
home.
you arrest them and send them back to where they came from.
Yeah, that's
Um,
fine, but I don't want to kill people. I don't want to drown people without knowing anything about them, without knowing their circle. Like, and again, I don't. That's not a liberal point. It's just
no.
a trying to have some basic human decency. Like, I don't know why we can't just have a mature conversation about things without becoming
Nah, I
an
know.
absolute and utter psycho.
I know there'll be some hate probably for this segment to say, "Oh, you're too Imbrista," but I long said, I said it back when, when I was with the Irish Catholic, that Catholics will be no more popular to the actual radical right than they were to the woke left, to put it that way, which is that because you actually, if you are a faithful Catholic and you're trying to follow Christ, you adhere to you adhere to a person, first of all, Jesus, but you also adhere to a set of principles that you're not going to bend just because baying mobs on social media are like, you don't feel strongly enough about this. You're not, you're not this, you're not that. It's like, yeah, sorry. I don't particularly care what you think of me. I care about what God thinks of me and what, the right and the just
Yeah.
thing is here.
The first level of courage is getting to the point where you're not afraid of the left and you're not afraid of the media and you're not afraid of the establishment and you're willing to like go against the general consensus. That's like one tier. The next tier is not even being afraid of the right or your own followers, or like that's another level that is
Yeah.
challenging, but yeah, it's
And a lot of
equally
the
important to not be
people,
beholden to anybody and to just say what you think.
yeah, and like people don't like it. I mean, a much smaller audience than you put out posts in the past where people come along and like, yeah, essentially view you as a liberal because you don't adhere to like absolutely radical approaches to, and like as again, based on everything we've said here, people of good will know where you come from on immigration, but people will come at you like you're some sort of raging liberal because you don't think that the lad in Citizen Vigilante was God's hammer himself or something like this. So yeah, but maybe to move on to another movie, that we were eager to talk about, Obsession.
Yeah, so more spoilers for those who haven't seen it. I believe you spoiled it already for yourself. Did you know, Jason?
I did, yeah.
So
I
you
haven't
don't
seen
mind.
it, but I didn't see it. I probably pretty much seen the whole thing through, again, clips on social media, as is the modern way of spoiling movies. And then I've read the plot and read different analysis and takes on it because it is a cultural phenomenon. The movie's absolutely massive, and that's why we obviously think it's worth talking about.
Yeah, so the very brief synopsis for those who don't know, and again, spoilers ahead. I'm not going to restrain what I say. So if you, I highly recommend you watch the film. It's an extremely good film. It's a horror movie. So if you're into that kind of thing, then skip the end of this podcast because you will enjoy it. But for those who want to stick around and hear it, I'll explain it now. That it's essentially a guy who's very timid who is friends with a girl and he likes her and he's liked her for a long time and he wants to ask her out, but he just doesn't have the courage to do it. So he goes to a kind of an occult shop and he gets this little trinket. It's like a stick or a piece of willow bark. And the idea is that you break it and you make a wish. And he thinks it's just a stupid little gimmick. He kind of gets it. He goes in there to get something else, like a present for her, and he sees it and he thinks, "Oh yeah, I'll pick it up. Why not?" And he uses it absentmindedly, not really expecting it to work. And he says that I wish she loved me more than anybody else in the whole world. And lo and behold, it works. But she becomes so obsessive about him because of the way he phrased the wish that it's scary. And she starts to basically have a mental breakdown because she's so afraid. And there's so many themes in it, like her actual like surname in the film is Nikki Freeman. of course, the Freeman is like an illusion by the director to like there's a free will dimension to it, so that's obviously like a little kind of reference there. And the I think men and women watching it get horror out of it from in different ways, because when I first started watching and I heard the premise, I was thinking, okay, I could imagine a woman being obsessed with you. I could imagine that being annoying, and in much much smaller ways I think we've all encountered like an obsessive person in our lives at some stage who is irritating, or I could imagine that, but I was like, how is that scary? I feel like a woman is not that scary intrinsically because she's not usually a physical threat in that
Yeah.
sense. So I didn't know how they were going to make it foreboding, but they did a really good job because you're dealing with a crazy person and she's unpredictable. Like there was one scene, it's not one of the scarier scenes objectively. Like nothing happens. She's not like there's no blood or weapons
No,
involved
no
or
jump
anything.
scare thread, I guess.
Yeah, so it shouldn't be scary really, but she's been acting really erratically and really psychotically, and she's in bed with him, and he's lying on his back and she's sleeping on him like this, and you can see he's really disturbed, he's freaked out, he's lying there like this, and then after a few minutes, he goes to kind of slowly get out of the bed and he just starts to move like this. And she goes, "Stay!" Like roars at him to stay without even opening her eyes. And he obviously like sits back down. But it was really creepy. And so anyway, the point I'm making, the reason it's culturally relevant is it appeals to the male fear of being with a psycho woman, and on her part, it appeals to the female fear of being with a man by force. There's like coercion element to it because he's such a weasel that he used this magical incantation to make her be with him, but her her real self is still in there underneath the spell. So she'll have moments, brief moments of lucidity where she breaks out of it and is like, what the hell is going on? What's going on? And at one point he talks he's he's speaking to the person who sold him the magic trinket and asking like how he can break the spell or whatever, and the answer is he can't. And they say, "Hey, do you want to talk to her?" And he's like, "What do you mean?" And he just hears screaming, like the most horrific screaming you ever heard on the phone. So she's stuck in her body in a state of torment with somebody she doesn't want to be. So obviously you can imagine from a woman's perspective how terrifying that is. So anyway, the whole thing, there's way more to say about it. I won't go on a big rant,
Yeah.
but the point is the whole thing, it's a horror about gender relations. You can tell if you strip away the supernatural element. Even his name is Bear. And obviously, we all remember that meme that was going around where women were saying, would you rather be in the woods with a bear or like a man? And so I believe that that's also an allusion to that. So yeah, it's a real. I don't. It's not a feminist or like a liberal film at all. It's more about like just modern malaise and
Well,
the modern anxieties that people have.
this is an interesting one because I'd found, yeah, again, maybe perhaps funnily for like a Christian or a Catholic, I found horror, generally speaking, to be fairly immune to a lot of the political trends that have afflicted other movies, actually. I'm sure you can find exceptions to that, but I think it's because horror, I'm quite a fan of the genre of horror. That doesn't mean, like, certainly, I think that there's a lot of dark stuff in horror movies, and I think I've met people before who sort of, how would I put it, really loved horror movies to what I would say is an unhealthy degree, because a lot of these movies, the better ones certainly do riff off of genuinely dark things, things that are genuinely not good for people, I would say. And I think if you give those things too much attention, it is ultimately bad for you. But I think that it's a very interesting genre uh, for consideration because they're generally, a horror movie is successful if it's genuinely frightening, or genuinely unsettling. Because we had an era there of like jump scares where movies, I think it was like the 2010s or even the 2000s, where movies were just trying to like give you a quick fright, and there wasn't too much like Paranormal Activity, I suppose, would probably exemplify that kind of genre of horror, where it was literally just full of sudden movements and things you weren't expecting. And there wasn't too much depth to that, whereas there have been some pretty phenomenally made horrors in recent years, I would say, that I think get into much deeper actual anxieties. And I think this is a really good example of that, where I do wonder whether this movie would have been as successful at another time when there isn't a sort of growing mutual antagonism between the sexes, so to speak. I
Mm.
do think that uh, men, by and large, on social media certainly think that modern women are toxic, and women think that modern men, by and large, on social media are toxic. And I do think you're seeing that seep into politics, and you're seeing that seep into collapses in marriage rates, collapses in the rates of people having children. And I do wonder whether, yeah, a movie like this would have done so well without that sort of background. I think we sort of view the opposite sex with, if not like outright horror, as is the case in this film, with sort of a base level of suspicion now, and with a sort of base level of hostility. Or, people very rarely encounter the opposite sex, even to take a step back. But I think that when they think about the opposite sex or conceive of them, or as is the case these days, mostly interact with them on the internet, those are the sort of negative associations they have swirling around in their heads. And I think that, yeah, because this movie was made on like with a budget. It was like, well, something like 700.
700 grand, yeah.
Like, that is nuts, and it's approaching like $500 million at the box office. That is an insane breakthrough. But as I say, there's some other really interesting horrors that have come out in recent years. Like, one of the better ones was Long Legs. I don't know if there's any horror fans amongst our listeners, but that involved a sort of satanic serial killer. That involved all sorts of themes of like repressed traumas and things like that. There was one came out last year, Weapons, and that one. Did you see that one?
I did, yeah.
Yeah, that one was like, a very conscious, almost like a modern fairy tale that was very much derived from fears around school shootings in the US and like the
And
dark.
I think it was also, there was a lot of like addiction and alcohol themes, like
Yeah,
because there's a lot of characters in that are struggling with drinking, and then also uh the part at the end where his towards the latter part of the film where his, again, spoiler for Weapons if you haven't seen that either, but we're just going to speak freely here. When his parents are in like that catatonic state and he's having to feed them and take care of them, and the director said that he grew up and his parents were addicts and he had to like take care of them a lot, and you feel like you're parenting your own mom and
yeah,
dad as a
yeah.
child, and the trauma of that, so yeah, a lot
And
of
it's like there is some value in being aware, I guess, of a lot of the threat. The like these are the things that like are deeply unsettling to a lot of people, and so I feel like there's even value in being aware of what exactly is kind of generating those emotions and those anxieties at the moment, because you know certainly on a interpersonal level, then I think like, yeah, just the fact that obsession is such a phenomenon now tells you a lot about young people now. I
yeah.
think that alone it tells you a lot about young people, and that's valuable. So no, I would say if you're a horror fan and you're not particularly unsettled, that one is probably to be recommended.
One of my biggest regrets in life is that I was never into horror. I never really liked it. I was even. It's not even because it was like, oh, it's too scary or something. I just never really. Um, I don't know. It just never appealed to me. And then after I met my wife, she started getting me into horror
Oh,
movies. Like she
interesting.
showed me, like we watched some, and I really liked it. And then very shortly, almost immediately after we met, she converted to Christianity and Catholicism, and then she started going off it because she was like, it's getting too real, like stuff about demons and things. I actually kind of believe in all that now. It was one thing when it was just like a kind of a spooky fiction, but now
Yeah.
that I think there is a dark component to the world, I don't like it. So she got me into it, and then of course everybody, if you're married, you don't really have free time to just watch a movie on your own. Like if you're gonna watch a
Yeah.
film, it's gonna be with your family. You don't just have like hours to kill where you're just sitting there without anybody around you. So
And
Yeah,
what did your
that was a great.
what did your toddler make of Obsession?
Yeah, yeah. No, we had to. Uh,
He
yeah,
just keeps
it's
covering
a.
your eyes.
Do you get the same impression? And I guess we'll end on this because we're on an hour and 15 minutes, and I'm sure people want to bounce. But do you get the impression? I when I feel like when I think about marriage and dating and relationships, I met my wife the year before COVID, 2019. And then a year later, I proposed, and then we got married. I don't know, not too long after that. And the seeing what's happened to culture in the aftermath of COVID, I feel like a guy who just got off a boat and I just watched it explode behind me. Where everything I see about modern online dating and things, I just go, Janie, man. And it's not like we're old, you know what I mean? Like I'm 29, you're what, 30?
Yeah, yeah.
Or coming up to it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So like we're not old or anything, but I'm watching it now from my escape pod capsule that is my happy marriage, and I'm just thinking, Janie, I'm glad I'm not there on that cape. Like it's
Yeah. No,
really bad.
I don't know how you could feel otherwise. I feel the exact same way. Like if you find someone who's on the same page as you, you are blessed beyond all men. I would put it that way. Because just look at the all of the things that kind of have to go right for a relationship to be good and solid. And I would, again, shameless pitch here. I think there's no better foundation for a marriage or for a relationship than Christ, because if you're both adhering to Him, it means you're on the same page, probably about all of the important things. But I would say that my wife and I have sometimes asked each other, what would you do if all of a sudden you were single and you were sort of thrust back out into the world? And I think that I would sort of take the same approach as I did when I met my wife, which is that like I would just go all in on what God for me, which is like I would sort of just pursue Christ as best I know how, and just sort of do the things that I'm interested in anyway. Like I this may be a bit of a cautionary tale, and maybe you get another horror out of this sense, but I always feel like the people who most wanted to get married were the least likely to. Some of the guys I knew who were absolutely obsessed with marriage as a concept, and they were just always talking about their future wife. I say a lot of those guys, like I knew loads of them, but the few guys like that I knew generally didn't have too much success in finding that. And I feel like if your focus in this present world is, oh, it's impossible to find someone good, and I'm never going to find someone good. Yeah, you're probably not going to. Whereas if your focus is on, you know, to use Jordan Peterson's language, becoming the best version of yourself, and it is going all in on on the good and on the things that you're good at, your reality kind of works that way. I feel like someone is much more likely to gravitate towards you who's also attracted to the same kind of vision. So I think, yeah, I would not be joining sort of dating apps or things, although maybe, I would eat my words if it ever came to that, and hopefully it doesn't. But I think the best strategy is to go, yeah, all in on the good, and that kind of has a certain magnetism itself.
Yeah, for sure. It's very unfortunate, and my sympathies are with anybody who is currently struggling with that, male or female, because it is
Indeed.
a universal experience now, almost. Very unfortunate, but
Yeah, I would say don't break any occult sticks if you come across any, and wish the person that you're interested in becomes infatuated with you.
yeah, incidentally, the funny thing is, both the director, I mean, it's a work of fiction, so they can say whatever the hell they want. Obviously, there's not too much meaning to this, but apparently, both the director and the actress said at the start of the film, she asks him, do you have a crush on me? And he chickens out and he goes, no, we're just friends or whatever. They said that in universe, if he had said the other thing, if he had gone, no, actually, I do have feelings for you, that she would have given him a chance. So, like the whole thing was avoidable. Like, but anyway, so I'd say there's an element to that too. Male cowardice and all of this, and I'm not
Yeah,
gonna,
the
I'm not
male
gonna
fear of rejection. That's the great challenge of the man in the 21st century.
I'm not going to be some kind of posturing machismo loser and act like I've never felt nervous to talk to a girl. Obviously, I think that's a universal male experience. Like, you know, particularly when you're like a much younger man. So yeah, you understand it, but also some people it just like cripples their life, you know.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that I think is another anxiety that is ripe for horror because there's a horror dimension to it.
Yeah, maybe we should make a horror sometime in our free time, aware of all of these cultural currents as we are. I think you and I could do a stellar job.
I'd say the special effects and acting would be comparable to Citizen Vigilante. So I don't know if that's I don't know if we'd recoup our budget for that
Our
one.
expenses, yeah.
With that said, we appreciate everybody's time and we look forward to catch you all next week for another episode of the Long Game Podcast. God bless.
God bless.